a potential conflict with China.
The U.S. is reviving airfields, both at home and abroad. That's so U.S. aircraft can hop between different locations across the Indo-Pacific instead of being tied to famous bases like Guam, obvious targets for Beijing's missiles. That's according to a report from the Wall Street Journal. Some of those airfields play major roles during World War II, like the one called Camp Davis in North Carolina that just reopened. The military is also rebuilding Tinian, an island in the Northern Mariana Islands. This is where U.S. bombers took off before dropping atomic bombs on Japan. Most of Tinian has been covered in jungles since it wasn't needed for decades. Now the military is bringing it back to life. In the Indo-Pacific, the U.S. has recertified an airfield in Peleliu, a site that was also useful in World War II.
Over in the Philippines, the U.S. is upgrading an air base to make it easier to accommodate American aircraft. Washington is also revamping 2 bases in northern Australia, making them more suitable for B-52 bombers. It's building up airfields close to Taiwan, too, where concerns of a Chinese invasion are looming. What's more, Taiwan mapped out its wartime food plans Tuesday. The rare directive involves stocking up on rice supplies and strategizing distributions so that the island wouldn't go hungry if China were to encircle it and block imports during a conflict. Just last week, Beijing encircled Taiwan during a military drill. The Chinese Communist Party sees Taiwan as part of China, despite never having ruled it. Washington is watching Beijing's next move toward the island closely. The U.S. Navy is getting ready to fight a possible war with China in 3 years. That's Beijing's self-stated timeline to potentially invade the island. To the north and south, China's neighbors are also making their own preparations to bolster defense. The Philippines are hoping to buy mid-range missiles. Japan released plans for its largest defense budget in history. And Australia is set to spend over $4 billion to acquire long-range missiles from the U.S. To talk more about the U.S. plan to restore overgrown runways and airfields on remote islands, we sat down with Casey Fleming. He's a national security expert and the CEO of Black Ops Partners. Casey also worked in the Office of Presidential Advance during both Bush presidencies. Casey Fleming, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
As the U.S. has been ramping up runways and airfields from World War II, this is to counter China's growing nuclear missile arsenal. Now, given those recent developments, how condensed of a timeline are we looking at here for a potential, say, Chinese invasion of Taiwan or other conflicts in the region between the Koreas or even the Philippines?
2025. As soon as 2025. Remember, we're only a couple of months out through the end of 2024 anyway. So very, very near term. The world is in chaos. The world is boiling. And you have this axis of totalitarian regimes against the free world. So it's very serious. And in our opinion, it's the weakest that we've been in the United States probably since the turn of the century in the 1900s. And certainly the same as World War II. And this is identical to the run-up of World War II. This time, though, at the speed of technology and the stealth of unrestricted warfare.
And Casey, when it comes to understanding the China threat, many say, to start at home, where we see things like espionage, intellectual property theft, the Confucius Institute's elite capture, as you were mentioning earlier, fentanyl, but also the weaponization of immigration. Give us a sense of how widespread this is here at home.
It is extremely widespread. We've been outsourcing for the past 40 years, and this is really the culmination of all that outsourcing. That outsourcing, absolutely, this globalism outsourcing needs to be done strategically to never weaken our hand, and we've gone way over that fulcrum, that balance that is so critical. So any type of technology that goes into China and comes out of China must be understood that it is weaponized against America and the free world.
And with this level and scale of infiltration that we're talking about here, how does the U.S. begin to counter this? Is it through awareness, or what are the steps needed?
Well, certainly awareness, and this time the family. the families at the front line, and the military is way behind the lines on this thing. In fact, the Chinese Communist Party believes that they can win this war by, defeating Americans in their homes, in their schools. They're seriously involved in the Ukraine conflict, and that's their strategy, is to weaken the United States across 3 or 4 fronts, including terrorist organizations. Honestly, if I can be so plain or direct, this is what World War III looks like, what you're feeling today. Every American will tell you something is afoot, something doesn't feel right. Everything's in chaos, nothing makes sense anymore. Will somebody connect the dots? And that's what you and I have just done.
Casey Fleming, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Only 2 weeks before the U.S. presidential election, leaders of the world's largest developing countries, including China, Russia, and India, among others, are meeting this week for the BRICS summit. NTD's Flora Hua brings us more.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is the host of this year's BRICS summit. That's much different than last year, when he joined via video call to avoid a Western arrest warrant. The Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping also flew to Russia. He and Putin referred each other as dear friends. With China and Russia being the dominant players, many see BRICS as a counterweight organization of the US-led Group of Seven. When asked whether the US is concerned that BRICS will undermine the US economy on Monday,
we're not looking at BRICS as evolving into some kind of geopolitical rival. That's not how we look at it.
But that might not be what Beijing and Moscow have in mind. Russia's economy has suffered after the West froze its foreign currency reserves, worth $350 billion. Putin just sat down for talks with the chair of the New Development Bank, a finance institute that serves BRICS.
It helps to minimize geopolitical risks to maximal extent, to freeing the development of economy from politics, if it is at all possible in today's world.
China is also on board with the idea. Beijing has been promoting RMB for regional transaction in hopes of one day replacing the US dollars as the world's reserve currency. It's seen as part of Beijing's efforts to avoid becoming the target
It's only
of
worth 3
Western
cents
sanctions
today.
and preparing for a potential invasion of Taiwan. Earlier in June, G7 leaders made it clear that they would continue to dry out Russia's capital and counter China's aggression in the South China Sea. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. In recent years, U.S. ally the United Arab Emirates, Iran, and others have joined the forum. The organization also invited Saudi Arabia to join. The country is the world's second largest oil supplier. Russia said 3,000 more countries are on the waiting list. The ongoing conflicts between Israel and Iran, Ukraine and Russia, along with China's interest in taking Taiwan, have pushed authoritarian countries closer together. Despite the U.S. holding firm as the world's top oil producer, BRICS crude oil production tops 40% of global output. One index shows the global GDP share held by BRICS countries has already surpassed that of G7 countries by nearly 5%. But G7 countries still lead the technology and innovation contests with BRICS. Flora Hua, NTD News.
As the U.S. and China engage in heated competition for global influence, a week ago, Canada expelled 6 Indian diplomats, including senior ones, over a murder allegation. The expulsion angered India. It dismissed the allegation and removed 6 senior Canadian diplomats from its country in retaliation. The move has brought the country's bilateral relationship to a record low. The Canadian government also accuses India of gathering information and targeting Indian dissident groups within Canada. Coming soon, new rules are slated to ban some U.S. investment into Chinese AI development. The federal government says the directives are under final review. Here's more.
The rules come from an executive order signed by President Biden in August 2023. It aims to keep American investors from aiding the Chinese Communist Party's military. Related investments that are not specifically